Yo, what is going on, everyone? It's your boy, Gsluke, here with our DFS and betting live stream for this week's CJ Cup Byron Nelson. Got to get through everything you guys need to know for this weekend. So whether it's for DFS, props, whether you guys name it, any questions down there in the live chat, going to make sure that we have all of that handled for you. And we're ready to go out there and have ourselves a week. We're back to a regular format, so I'm stoked for that. I know maybe not a signature level field, but still enough big names, enough of those mid to top tier guys that we can go out there and build some solid lineups. So we'll talk some lineup construction, a little bit about the weather and how you can use that to your advantage this week. And then afterwards, a few player pool things. So a few guys I just want to point out a little bit closer to clock there. Go over all your questions when it comes to DFS. And then towards the end, since I wasn't able to do an entire prop video, we're going to go through some of that analysis there, as well as a few prop slips over there on Underdog and Prize Picks that I'm getting to. I've already got 9 slips in at this point. I've got like 30 props that I've already taken across the board. So a lot of selection over there on that side, and I'm really excited to get into it. So we got Mondo down there early. Kevin, who says roll tide. First off, welcome on in. What's going on, buddy? Philly Fingers down there as well. Let's go ahead and get this thing rocking. So we're going to start off with a look at the weather. So, we could talk about the golf course. I have a whole breakdown on my channel on that. So we're not going to focus on that too much. It's an easy birdie fest, right? Last year, even moving from a par 72 to a par 71 format, still played over 2 under par. And when we take a look at the weather, it is going to be a huge talking point this week. And in general, we're going to be dealing with one of the more wet versions of this event that we've had in the past. There's expecting to be some sort of rain for at least the first 3 days and overnight. So tonight into the morning over there on Thursday, they're expecting over an inch of rain in this area of Dallas. So you're talking about a soupy golf course. Jason Day predicted that there's going to be preferred lies for pretty much all 4 days, and especially out there for Thursday and Friday, and the golf course is going to be so saturated. So this golf course might play a little bit longer than it typically would otherwise. But in terms of the, easy hardness, right, the difficulty of the conditions, it's going to be about as easy a golf course as you can find. There's not going to be much penalty for missing greens, right, as they're not going to be running very quickly. You're going to have an easy time getting up and down with those soft conditions. And on top of that, when you're throwing iron shots in there, it's pretty much going to stop where you hit it. So when you give players pretty low winds, right, if we take a look at Thursday, they're not calling for that much wind out there. If we take a look at this NEM model for Friday, they're calling for mild winds, right? Maybe like 11, 12 miles an hour of sustained winds in the afternoon on Friday. But all of that is very manageable for a Texas golf course. So I think you're going to see that low winning score that we're used to here. When this was a par 72, they could get close to a 30 under par. Now that it is a par 71, they're probably going to be closer to like 22, maybe to 25 under par. But they're really going to get after this golf course. But in terms of trying to time this up for a weather edge, this is where it gets a much more difficult out there. So the issue with the forecasts out there for Thursday and Friday are that the timings of the thunderstorms are completely up in the air. So some of the forecasts are calling for them to come overnight. So something around like midnight, maybe to like 3, 4 a.m., a majority of that rain and thunderstorms coming through. Some of the forecasts, though, are calling for later thunderstorms, right? So closer to like the start of lock. Which would probably cause a delay out there for Thursday. And some of them even have thunderstorm risks the whole way up until like 10 or even noon over there for the local time. So you're talking about a wide range of forecasts, right? Some of them calling for it to happen before play, some during play out there. So I could see there being a delay for Thursday. And then if you take a look at some of the local forecasts for Friday, they're calling for the same thing, right? There is, if we go over here to the NAM model, which again is probably the more accurate out of the two, for 48 hours out, you'll see that they're calling for thunderstorms that morning, right? So if there's a delay out there for Friday, that could throw off any sort of weather edge we're looking at. So what I would do here is embrace the variance, right? Embrace this chaos, right? We know there's going to be at least like one weather delay, if not maybe 2 or 3 out there for the first 2 rounds. So I would imagine that part of round 1 is likely to bleed into round 2, right? If we end up getting those delays. And I would try and plan for that, right? Whether it's stacking the AM PM wave or going out there and stacking the PM AM wave. I think that both of them are viable. I think both sides of the weather could be stacked in theory and work out. And with all of this unknown, I'm not going to pretend like I know exactly what's going to happen with all the different forecasts that we have, right? With them calling for just different conditions, different timings of these storms. It's hard to say with any kind of certainty what we're going to see. So it's the cop-out answer, but I'll be stacking both waves. I'm entering 150 lineups for the main slate this week. That's my main exposure. I'm out there for the large field GPPs. I'm going to have some single entries as well, which I'll talk about how I'm handling those a little bit later. But in terms of my GPP exposure, I'll have at least 25% that are stacking all AM wave golfers. I might make that 25% just like 5 guys out there from the AM wave. And we'll have to see. Might be 6-0, might be a 5-1 that I force in with that 25%. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other side, right? Out there with the PM guys. Out there for Thursday. Take 25%, either force in all 6 or maybe a 5-1 out there for that part of my exposure. And then the other 50%, right? I'm taking a quarter, right, and stacking in both directions. The other half of my lineups are going to be wide open, right? I'll be playing from players from both sides. Because there's also a scenario where you don't see that kind of weather edge, right? And I think where you'd see the biggest weather edge is if maybe the PM guys had to play all their round on Friday, right? Maybe the winds are a little bit higher on Friday than what you see on Thursday and maybe even Saturday morning, right? To go out there and finish up round 2. There's a chance that if they have to play a whole 36 holes, right, or 27 holes out there on Friday, that they're dealing with harder conditions than the other 2 days, right? Because Thursday looks pretty mild, right? If they can get out there, this model, I guess the NAM, not so much, but HRRR, which is a little bit better within 24 hours, looks pretty calm, all things considered, right? If they go out there on Saturday and it's also pretty solid conditions out then, right, they might get the better side of it. Whereas maybe Friday's calmer than what we're expecting, right? Maybe this NEM model is a little bit off. It ends up being closer to like maybe 5 to 10 miles an hour of sustained wind. If that happens, then maybe the guys playing all those holes on Friday, which might be the PM guys, right? If there's a weather delay out there tomorrow, could get the good side of it as well. So I would lean towards the AM PM guys based on the forecast right now, right? Which are all over the place, right? So you can't really take these that seriously this week, at least one forecast, right? If you're taking a look at 4 or 5 of them trying to draw conclusions, I think that's a better way to go about it. But based on the forecast that we're looking at right now, it does look like Friday has the highest wins of any of the first 3 days. So in theory, right, those guys that are in the PM wave tomorrow, but that might not finish their round, might get the worst end of it, right? If they have to play more holes out there on Friday when it's worst conditions, that would be the little bit of an edge that I see. So out there for my single entries, I mentioned, I'd talk about how I'm approaching those. I'm entering 2-3 single entries, and I might stack the PM wave in all of them. And by stacking, it'll probably be at least a 5-1. Maybe it is a 6-0 that I go with for all guys starting later on. There's a chance, right, that maybe I play a Jordan Spieth out of the AM wave anyways, right, out there with that 5 players from the PM. But we'll have to see how I handle that with my sort of exposure. So it's always worth going through the weather, right, talking about whether there's an edge to be had. I would say the edge this week, right, would be to account for the chaos, right? When we have delays, when we have the potential for guys to be playing more than 18 holes in a day, that could lead to a bigger edge, right? Because normally it's just 18 holes for the first 2 days, right? It's split up. It's, very much so spread out so that you don't get crazy sort of edges. But if one group of players has like 27 of those 36 holes on one day, right, that's where you could see a huge edge come in, right? Because it's not as spread out as what you have for the first 2 day setup. And sometimes for the first 2 days, we do get that sort of weather edge, but imagine that magnified because of that weather delay that could cause that. So that's why in a week like this, it's important to try and lean into that sort of weather advantage because they're usually amplified because of that exact kind of reason. So let's circle back to our DFS sheet. We're going to talk through some of the players I wanted to mention before, and more importantly, some ownership stuff and some strategy when it comes to building your lineups, because there's a clear way that the entire field that a majority of people out there building GPP lineups are going to build. And it is, I guess, the hint would be by highlighting those top 2 players. It has to do with that 10K range and people not getting there. So let's catch up on chat, see what's going on down there. We got Why I Win down there. We got Illinois fan, I'm assuming that's what it is, or a Illini fan out there for that school. It says, wave stack's a good idea. I think so. Yeah, so hopefully that answers your question, right? We had a whole segment on it. Yeah, I think so. The storm timing's unknown, so I'd stack both waves. That's how I would handle it. Pam says, it'll be lift, clean, in place for sure. Yeah, that's what Jason Day was saying. Fairway percentage should matter more than usual. Completely agree with you there. And I think if anything, it gives the shorter, maybe putting first sort of players a better chance this week because, they're more so known for hitting fairways, going out there and filling up with the flat stick. So that Brendan Todd sort of model who's not playing this week, he would be a perfect course fit for what we're going to get here. But a Justin Lauer off the top of my head, somebody like a Siwoo Kim, right, who's pretty accurate off the tee, probably get a bump this week for sure. So yeah, I agree with you there. And based on what Jason Day was saying, it should be like that for the entire week, right? He was saying that as of right now, they're still getting mud balls and they're expecting to get over an inch of rain overnight, right? So that's only going to get worse. They're for sure going to have it for Thursday and Friday. The question is, whether we get more rain on Friday, potentially more rain on Saturday. That's in the forecast as of right now. If that happens, we probably get it for all 4 rounds, right? Not just for the first few days. Will it be a ball strikers phenom or birdie phenom? It's a birdie course. So I'm looking at good wedges and looking at really good putters. So I guess we'll talk about that a little bit when it comes to my modeling. 20 lineups, 10 from each wave. That's a good way to do it. Yeah, if I was only entering 20 lineups, I would either do like a 7-7-6, where I take like 7 a.m., 7 p.m., and then 6 mixed lineups, or I'd go 10-10 like you're doing there. So if you really want to lean into that advantage, go with the 10-10, right? Don't even play the lineups. They're going to be split down the middle. But personally, I would be more siding towards the 7-7-6. I'm kind of giving myself a few lineups where I'm mixing the best from both waves, because the most frustrating thing, right, is having the player pool to go out there and hit the nuts, but not giving yourself, I should say, an opportunity to get to that lineup because of some of the lineup construction constraints that you had. So I'd probably go 7-7-6. That'd be my recommendation, but a 10-10 works as well. Shank is coming in with good form, but has not done good on this tournament. Do I like him? I think he models well. So if you take a look at my projections on Patreon, he's one of the, I think, top 10, maybe top 20 plays in the field when it comes to my modeling overall. The issue is that he's extremely popular, right? A lot of people agree with that. I have him as by far one of the higher owned plays in that range. And personally, I have guys like Gsluke, Mav McNeely as similar, if not higher upside plays than what you have there with somebody like an Adam Shank. So I agree, playing well, coming in with great form. That's why he's getting that attention. But for me in large field GPPs, a few lower owned prospects that I like a little bit more. So, and let's just talk about it, guys. This kind of slate, when we get a weaker than normal field, what we get is a lot of lazy analysis, right? Now, when it's a signature event, when it's a major championship for sure, right? You get a lot of eyes on the sport, right? And people that are really into golf take the time to research every player right out there for a signature event, even major championships with larger fields, right? You go out there, you actually do your deep dives. On a week like this, people are going to run their models. They're going to look at their projections from whatever tout site that they subscribe to, and they're going to run their lineups and, maybe exclude a few players, right? Not really worry about ownership and go out there and build lineups. It's one where you're going to see a lot of lazy ownership, and you see some crazy ownership numbers out there. Now, I don't have a lot of them on here. In fact, the ones that I'm talking about that are egregious are most of the players marked out here in black, because I'm fading almost every single one of them. There are just so many bottom tier, average tier players that are projected up here in this 8-9K range that have got it like 20 to 25% ownership. Now, Siwoo Kim is your highest owned player, but I kind of get that with Siwoo, right? He's actually playing well, right? He's the number one recent form player. So I kind of understand why he's getting that ownership. But, tell me why a Benny Ann is nearly 20%, right? Tell me why I've got, I know Jaegers has a win recently. I know Tom Hoagie's playing well, but you've got these guys at 20, 25%. And they're also overpriced this week, right? I think that's the part that people are forgetting, right? Like, you're spending way more than what you're used to for a lot of these players, and they're double the ownership of what we're normally seeing that, right? Maybe not double, right? But at least, right, a solid, 70, 80% higher when it comes to their ownership. It's not a great spot to be in. So there are pieces of chalk that I'm playing, but let's say the guys from Alex Norton down here to Adam Shank, I think there are 4 of them that I'm playing that are 15% plus owned. The rest of them, which is like solid 5 or 6 of the players that I have highlighted here, I'm just not playing at all. So I think it's a week to just fade some of the slapdicks. I guess to give you an idea, Benny Ann, you could tell, right, is a player that I'm not getting to. But just to add on top of that, like Thomas Dietrich, I really wanted to play early in the week. He's coming in with some egregious ownership over here on Wednesday. So I can't get there myself. Somebody like Steven Jaeger, right? He's like 20% owned, right? I just can't do it at a birdie fest, right? He doesn't have that kind of consistent putter that we can rely on at this kind of golf course. And he had that at the Houston Open, right? It's why he got his first ever tour win. I am not counting on that happening all that often, right? He's been around for a while. He's been in contention numerous times. unable to get the job done. And at $9,200, we don't need a win for him to be optimal, but he's got to finish top 5, and it's a birdie fest. You got to shoot at least 25 under par to go out there, win probably at least 23, 24 under to go out there and finish in the top 5. And I don't know if he can make enough putts to go out there and do so. So there are pieces of chalk here that I'm fading. There's more than that, right? There are more guys that I'm excluding from my player pool, but it's a week where I think the chalk up top is especially egregious. Like, I guess I'll point out Alex Noren. He's probably the one that I feel the worst about because he's number 2 in the field in recent form ranking, right? He's coming in, kind of like a Siwoo Kim with pretty solid form out here in 2024. So, you don't feel great about fading Alex Noren, but, remind yourself, it's a $9,500 Alex Noren. Like, it's just, you're spending so much for slapdicks out here this week that are also like 25% owned. Like Alex Noren I have is I think the 3rd or maybe 4th highest owned player on the entire slate, which you'd think at $9,500 people wouldn't want to play him, right? Same thing with Siwoo Kim, right? You would think that you wouldn't want to play a Siwoo Kim at $9,800, yet have him at about 25% ownership. So it's quite a steep number you're going to have to pay on a lot of these recent form guys up here in the 9K range. And I think unless you're completely sold on a player, right? If there's, one of those guys that just pointed out that you really like to, maybe you bet out there on Monday, Tuesday, then play them, right? You're going to plant your flag behind that piece of chalk and still play them. That's fine in moderation, right? If you're taking 1, maybe 2 of those players in your player pool, that's probably totally fine, or you can make that work out there with your lineup construction. But if your player pool was all of those sort of players, that's all the recent form studs, you're going to run into a problem this week. And it's magnified because it's a lazy week, right? Kind of like I said, starting off the bat, a lot of people aren't putting in all of the work this week. And the result of that is people just playing the recent form guys, right? Going out there, being lazy, following projections, so on and so forth. So that's what you're seeing with a lot of the ownership numbers. So guys I like as a pivot, and I'm going to mention Sanjay as the one guy in this range that I'm taking, but there are a bunch of them that I'm playing. And I guess it's worth noting that Jordan Spieth is not the 10% ownership that I might have been hoping for out there on a Monday. I've got him at 16%. Part of that is Bill Zalatoris withdrawing. Did not foresee that happening. So that's going to feed into what we have there with Jordan. But 16% is pretty solid. And I'll just give you a number. I'm not going to give you my exact exposure on Jordan, but it'll be over 45% out there in my lineup. So I'm taking an extremely aggressive stand on Jordan Spieth this week, who normally your top end guys, you're going for like 2x leverage. I'm going to have at least 3x leverage, if not, actually, I won't say anything else, if not closer to like 4x plus leverage out there in Jordan Spieth. So I'm really taking a stand on him up there towards the top end of the 10K range. But guys like Sanjay M, right, $9,700, the form is starting to come around, right? He's just a better player, like hands down, better player than Alex Noren, right? Hands down, better player than a Benny Yan, a Steven Yeager, even a Tom Hoge is. And he's coming in lower owned than every single one of those players that I just talked about. And he hasn't played at this golf course before, which is kind of surprising, right? Over the last, actually he has once, right? Back there in 2019, but it wasn't at this golf course. So he played this event, right? But not at TPC Craig Ranch. But I gotta like the fact that he plays good at Birdie Fest, right? I went out there and just looked at shots gained at courses where you have a scoring average better than 2 under par. And he was the best player up here in the top end of the 9-10K range, right? You have a few other players that are specialists at easy golf courses. Tom Kim was another one of the players that really pops there. Mav McNeely has success at Birdie Fest. Who else? Just off the top of my head, Daniel Berger was actually the number 1 player in the field when it comes to shots gained at Birdie Fest. Taylor Montgomery was a popper too. A lot of the guys that we're going to talk about, Sam Ryder, right? One of my core plays out there from the Monday live stream are all guys that at easy golf courses go out there and absolutely pop. So if you're telling me we're getting a slightly better Sanjay, right? He was injured like 3-4 weeks ago. So I think that had a lot to do with why he wasn't playing well. The fact that he's coming out here committing to this golf tournament, right, tells me that he's probably feeling pretty good with his health. And the shots gained metrics certainly back that up as well. So if you're telling me we're getting a better player, and I guess I'll just one-to-one compare him, right, out there to Siwoo Kim, right? Siwoo, better recent form, right? Obviously, that's why he's coming with the higher ownership. He's about 1.5 times the ownership of Sanjay. Actually, just a little bit more than 1.5 times the ownership we have here with Sanjay M, which to me is a massive mistake. So I'll always play the long-term talent game. Like, recent form usually dictates what we get with ownership. So when you're trying to find ownership fades out there for the large field GPPs, usually some of my prime fade candidates, right, are guys that are coming in with scorching form. And now sometimes I will take a stand on one of those players, but regression is a thing, right? Regression is a bitch, right? Is probably a better way to put it out there with some of these top end players. Like, it's not like Siwoo Kim's not playing well lately. It's just that he's played so well that it almost feels like he's due to come back down to earth, right? And he might go out there, prove us wrong, go out there, win this event, right? He played well here last year, right? So he's got the form and the course history. I understand the ownership, but Sungjae is, I don't want to say like objectively a better player, but at least per the metrics that I'm looking at long-term, objectively the better player. Right now, you could say over the last 24 rounds, right, that sure, Siwoo is playing a lot better than Sungjae. But if you look at anything 50 rounds plus between these two players, right, Sungjae boat races what you have there with Siwoo Kim. So give me Sungjae all day, $9,700. If you're going out there, you're stacking waves. Obviously, Siwoo Kim is one of the only guys up top that you can take from the PM. So I think he's valuable from that perspective. But if you're just going out there building a 50-50 lineup, right, where you're not worrying about one wave versus the other, right, give me Sungjae over Siwoo Kim the entire day. Down here in this 8K range, you have is a little bit more spread out ownership, I'd say. It's not nearly as chalky as what we have there in the 9Ks, but still guys like Adam Schenk that are exceptionally chalky. I'd say Keith Mitchell also garnering quite a bit of ownership himself. It's not like I'm fading all these players. You'd say Mark Hubbard, right, also getting quite a bit of attention. Seamus Power at $7,900, right, is also over 12% ownership himself. But it's not like you have to fade all of them, right? And just to give you an idea, right, I'm playing 2 of those 4 players. The other 2, right, are spots that I'm trying to get leverage on. So the key to making a player pool, going out there, selecting who you're going to use, right, is getting a good mix of pivots and going out there and taking a good mix of some of the chalk, because oftentimes the chalk are just the better players, right? Like I said, a lot of your chalk this week are just guys that are coming in with solid recent form. And it's not like you want to fade everyone that's coming in playing well, right? Like some of those guys are clearly going to keep their heater going. It's just not going overboard on that, right? Because your top 5, top 6 this week is not just going to be all the guys coming in with recent form. It never works out that way on the PGA Tour, but especially at a birdie fest like this that can just come down to the shots gained putting, you're going to get a lot of random guys that, you know, maybe not just lower tier players, but more so guys that just maybe aren't coming in with the best form that go out there and play well. And if you take a look at the leaderboard over the last 2-3 years that we've had it at this golf course, you've seen exactly that with the leaderboard. So just embrace that. Know you're going to see some wackiness and incorporate that into your player pool. In terms of a player I want to point out, Jake Knapp, I've got it 7.2%. And the reason why I want to point him out, and there's actually another player that fits this narrative that we're going to talk about as well, is the comp to what we have there at Vedanta Vallarta. So his first tour win was at the Mexico Open, an extremely long golf course. Now, much longer than what we have here, but what I like as a comp is that the holes here where everyone's going to score on is you got the 3 par 5s, all reachable. They all play about half a stroke under. Some of the easiest on all the PGA Tour. Those are going to be scoreable. We know that. You also have 3 drivable par 4s, right? We know that they're going to go out there and get those holes. A couple other mid-length par 4s they're going to see a lot of birdies on. But you have, I think it's 7 longer par 4s. So 7 par 4s that play over 470 yards. Those holes, in my opinion, right, 7 of the 18, over a third of the holes, right, fit into this category, which, you know, there's some short ones, there's long ones, there's middle tier ones to go out there and account for as well. All are long irons, right? They're like 175 plus yard approaches. Now, on top of that, so it's not just those 7 holes, you also throw in all 4 of the par 3s. All 4 of them are long, right? The shortest is 171. 3 of them are over 200 yards here. So that's at least, right, 10 holes, if not 11 holes, right, where you're hitting a long iron. To me, it's like a long-ass golf course, right? Like the other holes, the par 5s, the shorter par 4s are extremely short, right? Even the par 5s are shorter than what you have at most golf courses. The holes that are longer, though, are extremely demanding. And if you're going to win this event, right, you're going to birdie the easy holes. Everyone's going to do that. That makes the cut. Right? You're going to have to go out there. You're going to have to shoot at least 2 under par out there in those par 5s. Where you win this event is with the longer holes, with those long irons, going out there and making birdies, gaining over a stroke to the field out there, those longer par 4s. And that's where the edge of this is this week. So I'm starting to look at the Mexico Open for comps and driving distance, some of those long iron players were a lot of the guys that I was adding late to my player pool. So, you know, early in the week, we had our birdie or better percentage guys. We had our guys that played well, easy golf courses, right? Like a Sungjae that I talked about. The other sort of player that the player archetype that I was really targeting out there were guys like Jake Knapp. that went out there and killed it at the Mexico Open. So 7.2% ownership. I think you're getting a pretty solid number right there. And in terms of the shots gained, it hasn't been fantastic for Knapp, but he's losing with the putting. If you go to the last 24 rounds, it's a little bit better than what you have for the last 12. But what I like about Jake Knapp is that he has upside with the flat stick, right? When he first came out here in the PGA Tour, right, he was gaining with the putter. He was gaining with the approach play. He's super long off the tee. He had just, people were expecting great things from him. I mean, Rory was saying he's a potential superstar, right, out here on the PGA Tour. I wouldn't let a few sour putting weeks keep you from playing somebody of this kind of talent level. So that's what I'll say about the Napster. I need to get a sip of my coffee, and we need to catch up on chat and see what we're doing here. So 1 second, guys. I got a little carried away there, as I sometimes do. If you're doing over 100 lineups, is 38 players too many? So I have less than 38 players in my player pool, and I'm playing 150. So I would probably try and constrict it a little bit more, but it depends on your playing style, right? I play extremely aggressive. I take stances on players that are sometimes 3-4x the field. If you're more of like a 2x guy, you're more so even maybe a player that'll take like matching the field on a player, right? That won't go out there and necessarily take stands on guys. Will actually go out there and match the field. And 38 players is fine. So it depends on your playing style. I'd say for me, that'd be too many players. But for you, it could make sense. But like in Wesley Bryan at 4 birdies, I actually like him at 69.5 strokes. So I'd be okay with 4 birdies. He's been playing well lately. 4 of 5 made cuts. He has 2 of 3 made cuts at this golf course. So I think in general, I like him for tomorrow. And yeah, whether it's the birdies or the strokes line, I think both make sense. Hubbard is the most disrespected price. I don't know if I'd say he's disrespected, but you know, he could easily be a 9K player, right? Like I think these guys like Benny Ann, the whole way down here to like a Thomas Dietrich, Mackenzie Hughes, are all probably like $1,000 too expensive. But they're the same sort of guys as the players we have down here at the bottom end of the 8s, right? So you could have these guys up here in the 9K. You could have these guys, right, priced down like $400, $500, and everything would make sense, right? No one would bat an eye at any of that pricing. People were like, oh, like Cage Lee's course history, like, oh yeah, Mav has been playing well, right? Like, oh, Mark Hubbard, right? He's coming in off a really good team performance, right? Overall, it's just playing well, right? Yeah, he could be in the 9K range. So yeah, I don't know if I'd say he's disrespected price-wise because, frankly, that entire portion of the player pool is $2,000 too expensive. So that's the way I look at it. What's going on with Luke List? I think he's a decent course fit. He can't putt for his life, though. So if you're going to play him as a pivot, right, he's coming in at slightly lower ownership numbers. You're going to have to hope that he goes out there and figures it out, right? Gains 2, maybe 3 strokes on the greens, which is kind of asking a lot from him, right? He's historically not a very good putter, but I've seen crazier things happen. And I guess just to give you my take on it, I'm playing him this week, right? So I'm taking that chance. And a lot of it comes down to agronomy, where he's not as bad on bent grass. For Showdown Round 1, should you target afternoon golfers? I'm not sure, honestly. Round 1 Showdown's a little bit of a toss-up, right? Because it depends on if we're going to get a delay. You know, if we get a delay for 2-3 hours and they're finishing up play out there on Friday morning, then yeah, the PM wave might be where it's at, right? Especially if they're not playing while there's any actual rain coming down. But yeah, that's a tough one for me, man. I'd probably stay away. What's going on? Back 9 bets. Byron down there in chat. What's going on? Finally managed to get into a live show. Let's go. Glad to have you, dude. You're, by the way, if you haven't seen Byron's work, he's now doing the podcast over there with Kenny over there on the Degenerate show. Make sure to check it out. It's on the Mayo network, I believe, and it's unbelievable. So check it out. He's one of my boys down there in the chat. So we got Payne Palma says thoughts on Justin Lauer. So I like Justin Lauer. I do think he's getting a lot of love, though. And the reason why I liked him is he's got a good combination of approach play and then putting, right? So at this golf course, out of Birdie Fest in general, you've got to set up opportunities and you've got to cash in on them, right? I know it sounds like a super simplified process, like maybe even too simple, right, out there for this given week, but that is truly what it's about, right? Generating birdie looks and then taking advantage of them when you get them. If we take a look at the shots gained metrics for somebody like Justin Lauer, but you see why I'm excited about it, right? His 2 categories that he's the best at are what is going to be emphasized this week. So I think it makes sense, but I do also have him getting some steam. So he's down here, $7,400. $7,500 down there in the middle of the 7K range. I've got him, I think the last ownership run, it was like 7-8% ownership that I have Lauer at, which isn't unowned. So you've got to play him in like 15% of your lineups, but It's not crazy. I'm doing it. I'm playing them this week. Chan Kim, Hisatune, and Novak. I like Hisatune and Novak, but I'm not sure if you're asking me to choose between the three or my thoughts on each one, but go ahead and let me know, man. It'll give you what you're looking for. You're playing a single entry and you have one spot left. Who is that one guy? Well, not knowing your salary and kind of just choosing anyone for me, it's Jordan Spieth. He's my player that I'm getting the most leverage on of any player this week. Now, you might not have the salary to spend there, right? So if you had to go a little bit cheaper, it's probably KH Lee. I think he's being disrespected ownership-wise. People aren't going back to somebody that's won here in 2 of the 3 years that we've played here. And he doesn't have to win to pay off the $8,300. So yeah, give me KH Lee. I bet him at 50 to 1, and I'm looking to get some exposure to a top 10 on KH Lee because if he doesn't win, I still see him getting in contention. You're riding the nap ladder for the top 20, 10, 5. I like that way to going about it. Like just stacking them, right? Obviously, he goes top 5. You get 3 of those bets to go through. I'm sure you have a tweet out about it. I'll check it out, Byron. I'll have to see what you did with the odds there, but I like that, especially like somebody that like him that fits this golf course. Like you're buying low on Jake Knapp right after some sketchy recent form. That's the perfect player to do that on, right? Because you're going to get decent odds for this top 10s, top 20s and whatnot, unlike somebody up here in the 9, 10K range. And yeah, I like him this week a lot. Philly says, you're in the middle of the pack and one and done. Who do you like? Who has the most win equity that is semi-low owned? So yeah, that's how I'd go about it, right? You're middle of the pack. You're looking for upside, but somewhat decent leverage to the rest of the field. I'd probably go down here. I mean, Sanjay, he's going to get some ownership, but he'll probably still be sub 5% used on a week like this. So you could go to Sanjay. I think he makes quite a bit of sense. I would avoid Siwoo. Siwoo's going to be like 10, maybe 15% owned, and a lot of the one and dones out there. Who else would I avoid? I might avoid Tom Hoagie. I think Tom Hoagie's going to be like 5 to 7.5%, and some of those one and done. So I would probably try and avoid that too. I wouldn't hate a Tom Kim. Obviously, he's one of my core plays, so I would back that. But a Sanjay, a Tom Kim would make a lot of sense. A Mackenzie Hughes, if you haven't used him yet, I think he would make sense at this kind of golf course. Or a KH Lee. I go to one of those sort of players. So I guess the ones that you want to avoid, right, are probably even more important than going over the ones that you want to play. If you're trying to avoid the chalk, right, it's Siwoo Kim, it's probably Tom Hoagie. I would avoid Jordan Spieth, right? He's going to be pretty chalky this week. Jason Day, too, right? He'll be like 5 to 7% himself. Those are the guys I'd avoid, and I'd try and target one of those other guys. Yeah, Byron is a hell of a model maniac. Yeah, that's for sure. Mondo loves Aaron Baddeley, so I'm assuming we're getting some sort of comment about Baddeley here. Let's see. Usually leave money on the table. That's totally fine. Especially in a week like this. Hey, Mondo, I know normally I tell you don't leave as much salary. You can do it on this kind of week, right? It's a birdie fest. I could see that a 7,500, maybe an $8,000 average salary being what you have to have. But let's see what you got. You've got Power, Siwoo Kim, Olesen, Scott, and Baddeley, and you need somebody for your last man in. So you're going to leave some salary on the table is what you're saying, right? So where is Norlander in the pricing? I know he's a good ways down here, right? Norlander is down there at $6,500. So I'm assuming you want to stay in that range, which is leaving salary on the table. You already took Baddeley. He's actually one of my top options this week. So you took him away from me. Carson Young would be somebody I'd consider. So I'm assuming that you're going to have, he's at the same price as Norlander. I'd go with Carson Young, who I wasn't planning on talking about. I was planning on keeping him for the Patreon and some of those guys behind the paywall. But yeah, I like Carson Young this week. Carson Young a month ago was everyone's darling for PGA DFS, and now no one plays him. Crazy. Those bounce back spots are good. Cheers down to chat. Cheers to everyone. I got my coffee tonight. Which if you can't tell, I'm a little wired up. It's because of this coffee. I've had like 4 today, which isn't great for the cardiac health. But hey, it's a Wednesday. We're grinding out content, getting ready for this week, so we need it. Less than $9,000. So you could spend up to $9,000. I mean, yeah, man, I'd spend your salary, right? I wouldn't leave $3,000 on the table. Ideally, I'd take Tom Kim. But hey, if you wanted to leave that salary and go out there and take somebody else, then do it, right? You make your own lineups, that's for sure. You just got your NBA lineups in. Okay, sweet. Yeah, I haven't done NBA DFS lineups in so long. I've done a few over the last few weeks, but I've get to 150 max for like 2 years, which is saying something. It used to be my number one sport. But I have to rewatch the beginning. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions, man, about the weather. That's towards the beginning, and then when you get to here, obviously. Kelly Craft projects really well in your model, but not in my poll. Yeah, so there are plenty of guys, right? I'm going to be not playing that are modeling well. A lot of that is ownership, right? And a lot of that is small sample size. So you'll see it when you have guys that are playing from the Corn Ferry Tour or players that, maybe are on a sponsorship exemption from time to time. Kelly Craft, all of his really good starts are in weaker field events, right? So like alternate field kind of stuff. And a week like this, right? Because he doesn't play in signature events, so on and so forth. So you have to take the data with a grain of salt, right? Not all of that is going to be the gospel out there to tell. So it's because of that, right? He plays in a lot of really shitty fields. So you have a lot of guys that fit that description. Like, for example, Siwoo Kim, I'm not playing, right? My number 2 and 3 model rankings, I'm pretty sure I'm fading those players too. A lot of that's ownership, but in the case of Kelly Craft, it's sample size. I got you, absolutely. Asking which one I like the best. Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure I was answering the right question. So out of those three, it's Chim, Kim, Hisatune, and Novak. That is Novak for me. Now, Novak does have the highest ownership, right? So you're going to pay that price. If you need to get different, go Hisatune, but I like Novak the most. Form has been there. Fits this kind of course. He's a decent putter, a little bit streaky there, but a pretty consistent iron player, pretty consistent tee to green player in general. So yeah, I would go Novak if you can take the ownership at like 7-8%. I would go Hisatune if you need a little bit more of like a sneaky pivot, right? Somebody closer to like 3-4% ownership rather than 7-8%. Let's see. Need a Craig Ranchwater as a nod to the big guy. Hey, first off, nod to the big guy out there, DGen75, of course. And then Craig Ranchwater, I'm not sure who that is. I should know that though. But yeah, nod to the big guy, of course, thinking about you at DGen75. And let's get after it this week. I know he's probably super hard at work for this week, and I can only imagine who he's locking this week. I know he always put out this little tidbits and whatnot. That's probably the thing that I miss the most about his content. First off, seeing him out there, but those tidbits to do about the player that he's taken for any given week are probably the best piece of content that we have out there in the DFS space. I don't think that's a hot take at all to say. I think it's probably the most entertaining piece of content that we have out there from week to week. So mostly looking forward back to that when we get DJing back here on a weekly basis, which is going to be a great thing. So let's talk about this a little bit more. So where did we leave off with my plays? I know we talked about Nap. In terms of bottom end of the 7K range, I'd say your ownership's pretty spread out. So while at the top end of the sevens, you have some spots of chalk that you kind of have to navigate, right? You can't play all the chalk up there at the top end of the sevens. The rest of the 7K range is pretty wide open. In fact, I think your highest owned player at this part of the player pool, let me just double check on my other spreadsheet. I'll give you the highest owned player, but it's nothing crazy. And I'll give you his ownership number. So down there towards the bottom end of the sevens, I guess Peter Kest at 7,500. Worth pointing out, he's the highest owned player that I have there in the 7K range. But lower end of the 7K range, your highest owned player is CT Pan of all people. And I've got CT Pan at only 6.7% projected ownership. So, you're not going to get out of hand with any player in this range. And it's towards the bottom end of the 7K range because there are so many players to choose from. I mean, you're talking about sub 3% of players pretty much across the board. So the reason for that, and the reason why we don't have a lot of ownership down here towards the sixes and especially even the lower end of the 7K range, is because of how balanced everyone's lineups are going to get. And I meant to mention this off the bat. I can't believe I skipped this because it's probably the most important piece of advice I could give you this week, is that lineup construction is a real easy way to get different, right? If you want to play some chalky guys like a Jaeger, a Hoagie, Mitchell, Tom Kim, right, that are all getting this ownership down there, 8K chalk, right, that I was mentioning before, an easy way to do it is just to either play Jordan Spieth or to play Jason Day. And I mentioned Jordan Spieth as the one guy, right, that I'm getting way over the field on. If that person is Jason Day to you, right, that won this golf tournament last year, by taking that sort of player, you're going to differentiate yourself to the rest of the field, right? If you went Jordan Spieth, Siwoo Kim, that is going to be a pretty contrarian way to go out there and play Siwoo Kim. If you're going to go Jason Day, Siwoo Kim is your second man in, right? That's a really good way about going out about taking him right out there for GPP lineups, so on and so forth. That's a way that you can go out there and change it up with your spending your salary, as opposed to going out there and taking all the same kind of lineup constructions as the rest of the field. So to give you an idea, I think most people are going to take one 9K player. And I think maybe it's Siwoo Kim that most people are starting with, but maybe it's a Siwoo, maybe it's a Sunjay, even going down here to an Adam Scott and Alex Noren. And then their second man in is probably another 9K player, right? So I think the most common lineup strategy, right, is going to be to take two 9K guys, one or two guys down there in the 8K range, and then completely avoid the 6Ks, right? Finish it off with two players in the 7K range. I could see it being 3 players in the 9Ks, right? Maybe 1 8 and 2 7s, or maybe three 9Ks and then 3 7K players out there for your lineup. Those are the kind of lineups that are going to be popular this week, right? The ones that are going to be lower utilized out there in the GPPs are going to be taking a 10K player, maybe 1 9K, and then maybe doing a jump down to the 7s, right? Or taking a 10K, a 9K, an 8K, and then jumping down into the 6K range and taking one of the nasty plays down there. By spending more aggressively up top, and that's why I think Jordan Spieth, right? It's why I'm getting 60% exposure, right? Like, I'm forcing myself into these sort of builds quite often. I'm actually kind of happy to spend the 10,900 because I know a lot of other people aren't going to do so. And it lets me take chalkier players down here in the 8 or 9K range. So that is something to consider just in terms of the lineup construction segment. Something I wanted to mention off the bat that I'm glad that I caught and can mention now is that all you have to do to change it up and get different to what everyone else is doing is don't skip the 10K range, right? Like, normally it's contrarian to skip the 10Ks, right? Like, normally we'd go like, oh yeah, avoid the Scotties, the Rorys, whoever's up there in the 10Ks, and you might get a little bit different. It's the exact opposite this time, right? Like, in fact, most people, right, are skipping these 2 top end players. I'd say probably 70% of lineups, right, are going to start from this 9K range below, and at least like half the lineups are going to start from like a Sunjay and below out there in that sort of pricing range. What that does is that it takes you out of the 6Ks and it takes you out of the lower end of the 7K range as well. So just food for thought when it comes to the lineup construction. If you get a little bit different up there in the 10Ks, it not only pays off with player right win equity out there with like a Jordan Spieth, a Jason Day, it also gets you different from lineup construction. So guys, I'm going to point out in the bottom end of the 7s that are going to be lower owned, right, because of guys skipping the 10Ks, would be like a Taylor Montgomery and Alejandro Tosti. And there are a ton of guys down here at the bottom end of the 7s that I love, a bunch of top end of the 6K players that I'm looking at too. And it's all about birdie or better production, right? And with Taylor Montgomery, you have maybe the best putter in all the PGA Tour, right? He's at least a top 5 putter for sure out there with the PGA Tour stats. You take him, right? He's more than capable, right, of making the birdie putts this week. I think he makes sense there at 4%, and Alejandro Tosti at 4.6%. So not only are you getting, right, some differentiation up top, right, by taking a Jason Day or a Jordan Spieth, you're also able to get sub 5% on players down here. Like, top end of the 7K range, the average ownership is probably like 7.5%, 8%, right, across the board, right? Just between these players that I'm highlighting right here. Bottom end down here, right, we've got 4%, right? We've got 4.5% on a Toasty. It's easier to get leverage to the field, and you can also, get more leverage and move up the board on more lineups when they're only owned in like 4% of lineups. So I like that quite a bit. In terms of the 6Ks, it's still like Sam Ryder, right? Took him for an outright. I'd win over 7K if he wins. So that would be great to see. A little $50 bet on Sam Ryder at 150 to 1. But guys like Cam Champ make a lot of sense here, right? He's a birdie or better guy. He can get hot with the putter from time to time. We know he's going to take advantage of the drivable 4s, right? The par 5s. And also, I think something that is slept on with Cameron Champ is that his long iron play is really good, right? Because from 175 to 200 yards, he hits like an 8 iron that far, 9 iron that far, 175 yards, right? He's hitting just tiny clubs into some of these par 3s and longer par 4s. That has a huge difference on his scoring. And at a golf course that is this wide open off the tee, it feels like Cameron Champ, if he's going to go out there and nuke and finish top 5, top 10 at a PGA Tour event, it's at this kind of event where you got to get to 20, 25 under par. So I like him at $6,900, and you can see he's 2% owned, right? So not only are you getting the Jordan Spieth at $10,900, in my opinion, and I know some people look at this 6K range and say that you can't play anyone down here. I see plenty of guys that are viable. Like I see plenty of guys that show up to these birdie fests, plenty of guys that have upside. Alex Smalley might have some of the worst form of anyone in the field, but if you sort this by shots gained birdie fest, he's one of the best players in all of the field, right? So, there are ways to find players down here. I think the power players like Cameron Champ make sense. Shots gained birdie fest will bring you to a guy like Alex Smalley. Alexander Bjork also plays really well when you get him out of birdie fest. Carl Yuan, same thing, right? More of a birdie fest sort of specialist. Those are the kind of players that I'm taking down here in the 6K range. So I'm not getting too much exposure to any of these guys in particular. Like I'll have at least 7% of anyone that I'm taking down here, but I'm not taking like 15% into Cam Champ, right? I'll have like 7, maybe 10% of a lot of these players which is enough to get exposure, right? Try and make it worthwhile to get enough combinations with those players. Because, like, you don't want just 1-2 lineups of the guys down here down low, right? That's why I kept my player pool a little bit tighter on a week like this. Because if you're going to hit, right, and you only have maybe 1-2 lineups with Cameron Champ, you've got to hope to get the other 5 spots right, with just 1 or 2 lineups, which is extremely hard, if not like impossible to do, right? Out there on a slate this big. How you give yourself a better chance of hitting the optimal, or at least getting close to the optimal to go out there and get a takedown, is to play them like 7 to 10%, right? Because if you play them at 7, that's like 10, 11 lineups. You play them at 10%, that's 15 lineups right there that you're playing somebody like Cameron Champion. If you're 150 maxing, like myself, that is, that sort of exposure gives you a much better shot, right, of going out there and actually binking the large field GPP. So it's worth noting that I take more of an aggressive stance out there with my player pool. And on a guy like Cameron Champ, I'm in that like 7 to 10% range when it comes to my exposure. And I'll do that for quite a few guys down here. Now, Alex Smalley, right, somebody that's lower owned than the rest, probably a little bit of a riskier play. Maybe that's like a 5%er, right? Maybe I go slightly lower on somebody like an Alex Smalley, but you get the idea. Let's see, anyone else? Yeah. So one more play I wanted to point out. It's Brandon Wu. I mentioned him a little bit earlier when we talked about Jake Knapp. And he plays really well at Birdie Fest, and he plays really well at the Mexico Open. I believe it's 3 straight top 10 finishes that he has at the Mexico Open. And a lot of that's the long iron play, and a lot of it's the off the tee play. He's extremely accurate, which will be great for the lift, clean, and place. He's also a high birdie percentage player, which is, I think, why he plays so well at these Birdie Fests. And he's essentially unowned, right? He's 0.8% owned. He's $6,600. And he's not even the cheapest player that I'm taking out there in lineups. Like, I mentioned Carson Young before, right? Down here at $6,500. I actually think he might be the cheapest guy that I'm getting to. I guess he is the cheapest guy that I'm going out there and playing. But like, there are names down here that I think are viable for the larger field contest. So don't be afraid to dumpster dive a little bit. Don't be afraid to change it up with lineup construction. And again, if you want to play a Siwoo Kim, like a real easy way to eat that chalk and go out there and still build lineups that can leverage the field and not duplicate themselves, is to take them with a Jordan or Jason Day, right? Force yourself into that 6K range for at least one of your spots, maybe a lower end of the 7K guy, right, for one of your spots as well. And then you're totally fine with your last 2 spots to spend in the 7, 8K range. So that's how I would go about handling the chalk. Again, I'm fading a Siwoo this week, if that wasn't obvious based on what I've said. Benny Ann, I'm fading. Mentioned that, right? I'm not afraid to say the guys that I'm fading. A lot of people are, right, out there in DFS. You're going to get your fades wrong. In fact, sometimes your fades are going to win the golf tournament. And obviously, that doesn't go well, but you have to be bold to go out there and win GPPs. You can't play everyone in your player pool if you're going to go out there and get leverage. And at a weak field event like this, where guys, in my opinion, are just way too expensive, I'm going to lean into that even more. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how I'm approaching this kind of slate, right? We talked about a few guys that I'm playing that you can choose whether to fade or take yourself. But more importantly, right, I was hoping to give you guys some insight into how I'm approaching this kind of slate. So what I'm going to do next to round off our DFS coverage here is go through a little bit of lineup construction. So we're going to bring up Draftkings. We're going to talk through how I'd build a few lineups by hand. And I guess to be specific about it for the large field GPPs, right? So to go out there, get different, get some leverage to the field, give you an idea of how I'm doing that. Absolutely. What do I think about Valimaki to make the cut? So you're going to have to give me the odds if you're talking about a bet. If you're just talking about for DFS in general, I think he's got a decent chance. Now, the only concern I have is whether his skill set is made for this kind of event, right? Made for a Birdie Fest. And just, I guess, to be fully transparent, it's because I don't think we have enough data on his game, right, to go out there and make that determination. But he's gone into contention before, right? It's a skill set to go out there and do that on the PGA Tour. I think he's a decent play, but I'm not sure if he fits this golf course, is I guess what I'm trying to say. You got Siwoo under 68. I'm with you there. And Wesley Bryan over 4 birdies. But yeah, I took him for strokes, but I like both those props, honestly. Thoughts on Davis Thompson? I think he's a decent play this week. He's not my favorite play, but he's relatively low owned. I think I have it like 9% ownership on my last run that I went with. And excuse me, guys. My throat's killing me. 1 second. Much better. I was having trouble like fully talking there for a second, but we're much better now. Davis Thompson, though, I'm very average on him this week. He's like 9% owned, so he's getting some ownership. out there in GPPs, but he fits this kind of golf course. Hits the ball a long way, hits the long irons well, right? I'm looking for that in a lot of my players, but he's getting some attention, so I don't think he's that low owned. About how many players are you looking for in your player pool for 40 lineups? So again, it depends on how aggressive you want to be with your exposure, right? If you're taking guys 4 or 5x leverage like I do, right? I mean, you probably want to have 20 guys, right, for your 40 lineups. Now, if you're spreading it out a little bit more, maybe like 25%. I'll tell you that he's sub. Let me give you an accurate number. I'm not going to give you the exact number. I'm going to give you a good range, though. So Ryan Fox is sub 5% owned. I'll give you a good idea for where he is. He's pretty close to 5% to give you about as big a hint as I possibly can without telling you. He's low owned. If you're looking for leverage on him, you're going to get that for sure. So what I'm going to talk about here with lineup construction is if I'm hand building, right? So, if you're out there hand building a single entry, this is kind of the thought process you want to go through, but you can also do this for a large field GPP. And you want to just pick right off the bat. This is, in my opinion, the best way to hand build out there for PGA DFS is before you even start clicking players, before you even start figuring out like who you're going to take, right? Let's figure out where you're going to get different. And I always say to be intentional about where you're getting your leverage. And I usually like to decide that before I even start clicking names, right? So there are a couple ways you could go about it, right? And this is for pretty much any week, but especially at this golf tournament. You can do it with lineup construction, or you can do it with your player pool choices, right? So with lineup construction, that would be taking the 10K option, right? Getting different off the balanced approach that I think you're going to see a lot of people take. The other aspect would be to take the chalkier lineup construction. So to avoid this 10K range, right, out there in the lineup, and then just do it based on player selection, right? So rather than taking the super chalky Siwoo Kim, right, this is where you force in the Sungjae Im, right, as the player that you're starting with. So there are a few different ways to go about it. And in my opinion, something that, I build the best lineups when I go about it this way is I decide before I go out there and click any names, what the hell I'm going to do, right? Have a game plan for how you're going to build lineups. So what we're going to do for this first lineup is get different with lineup construction. So we're going to throw Jordan Spieth in there, right? Just make it uncomfortable when it comes to the salary right away, which is going to force us into a different salary range than what we want, and is going to give us that leverage we're looking for. So let's take Jordan Spieth there. Our second man in, I'm going to go ahead and throw in Tom Kim at $9,000. Third man in, I'm going to throw a Gsluke in. So we've got 3 players towards the top end of the board, 2 guys that are, I'd say, medium ownership, one that's relatively low owned out there with Jordan Spieth, at least compared to his neighbors, right, out there in terms of ownership. And now we're down to $7,200. So at $7,200, I don't really want to live in the bottom end of the 7Ks. So this is where I force in a 6K guy. So this is where you go down there, you throw in, let's see, Brandon Wu right there at 6,600. Now we're up to 7,600. So maybe we take one player at the bottom end of the 6s, but now we don't have to take 3 guys, right, that are like $7,200. So we could throw in an SH Kim. I actually kind of like him on a week like this, and that put you at $8,100. Maybe you go a little bit more expensive for your 5th guy, and you take maybe like a $7,300 Montgomery, who I mentioned is one of my favorite plays in that range. That puts you at 7,900, right? You could take a Davis Thompson if you wanted to. You can go down there, throw in the Luke List, a Ben Griffin, right? If that suits you there at $7,700. This sort of lineup does not have all that 9K chalk, right? Like the guys that are getting all that attention that are the super chalky players that you kind of have to avoid, I guess I'll just click them all into the same lineup to go ahead and just like kind of point them all out. Like these 3 in particular, right, are the ones that are all like 20, maybe even 25% owned. If you can avoid this lower end, even mid end to the 9K range, that's where you can go out there and get some leverage to the field. So at least that's how I'm handling it, right? You could choose to get different in a different part of the leaderboard, but where you can take the biggest stands, right, and get the biggest leverage, in my opinion, is there in the 9Ks, right? And a good way to do it is to take a 10K guy and force yourself out of it sooner rather than later. So that's one way you could go about building lineups. The other way, right, is with player selection, right? So that's the lineup where maybe you start with Sungjae, maybe you start with an Adam Scott, right, as your first man in. Your second man in, rather than taking a Tom Kim, who's getting a little bit more ownership, maybe that's where you throw in a Mackenzie Hughes, who's slightly lower owned. Over here in the 8Ks, right, that's where you throw in a Jake Knapp, right, who's like 7% owned himself. This is where you get a little bit funkier with your lineups, right? Like you can still take McNeely, right? He's like 15% owned. You could still throw in, let's see, like a Cage Lee, right? He's like 14% owned himself. But you have guys like Knapp that are lower owned than their peers. Same thing with an Adam Scott, a Mackenzie Hughes, right? They're all pivots compared to the guys around them. And for your last man in, now you could probably take a piece of chalk like you wanted to. Like CT Pan is like 7%, right? So he's not a leverage play at $7,300. But even if you wanted to take him, you'd be totally fine, right? Because of the rest of the players that you're taking here. Your lineup construction is pretty similar to what you have with other lineups. And I guess to make this even more chalky, right? Like I know we took 9K, then a bunch of 8K guys there, right? I think you're going to see a lot of lineups that go like this too, right? They go like, and again, we were getting different about it, but the chalkier version of this, right, would be rather than going Adam Scott, they throw in like a Norn, right? They take a Tom Hoagie as their second man in this 8K range, right? It could be a McNeely, it could be a Hubbard, it could be a Cagely. Like take your pick, right? One of those three guys is your third man in. This is what you want to avoid, right? You want to avoid just falling into that same trap that everyone else is going into, because I mean, lineup construction is just like a super easy way to get different right there, but it's not like that lineup construction is guaranteed to get there, right? It's just what people are comfortable with. And something that we know about PGA DFS, right, is that being comfortable hardly ever pays off out there when you're building lineups. And more importantly, at a birdie fest like this, an event that is wide open, right, because it's highly dependent on the putting, you don't want to be playing all the safe plays, right? Like we know there's going to be surprises. It happens every single time that we play this event, especially since we've gone to TPC Craig Ranch. Like build lineups knowing that, right? Knowing that you're not just going to see all the chalk hit because it happens every single time. So that's what I'll say about lineup construction. If you're just here for DFS, that is going to be the main talking points all for that. So if you're heading out of here, go ahead, smash the like button if you haven't already. And we are going to be doing showdown live streams this weekend. So make sure to tune into those. Subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss those from rounds 2 through 4. But still plenty to talk about for props. So I've got like 30 props I've already entered. So we're not going to go over all of them here, right? Of course, kind of like the spreadsheets I was showing before. So let me bring those back up. All of that can be found on my Patreon page. So if you want everything that was blacked out on the spreadsheets, my ownership, my entire player pool, projections to use in your optimizer, so on and so forth, make sure to check out the Patreon page. There's a link in the description of this live stream, the replay video, right? If you're watching this on replay, and on there is where you can get access to these. So check that out. It's also where I'm going to be posting all of my prop cards, but we're going to be touching on at least 3 slips here over here for the live stream. So you'll get a good idea for the kind of exposure that I'm getting to, but for all the slips that I'm taking and for them as they drop, right? So you can catch things before they bump. Make sure to check out the Patreon page because like, just to give you an example, I took an under on Aaron Wright, 69 strokes. Same thing for Thomas Dietrich when he was at 69 strokes and underdog. And now they're both at 68.5, right? They both bumped down because of some of the value as the week went on. So if you want to catch those before that kind of line movement, check out the Patreon. Same thing for the spreadsheets, right? It's where you can download it for yourself, use it for your own research process, and get all of that data, not only for the main slate, not only for round 1 for props, but rounds 2 through 4 showdown and also rounds 2 through 4 for props. Let's see. Love him, Kevin on Davis Thompson. Yeah, so another person that likes him. Yeah, so the ownership's going to be there, but I agree with you guys. You went with Cagely and Mav at Hard Rock, both at 50-1. Yeah, so I don't have a outright on Mav quite yet. I might add one. I took his top 10, David, and let me check the odds. I got his top 10 at plus 550. So I took a slightly different route because he didn't have the 55-1 that I was looking for. But yeah, Cagely at 50-1. You can't tell me that if you played this event 50 times that he's not winning at least once, right? He's won 2 of the first 3 times they played there. So right there with you, man. So let's talk about these props. So the main focus, right, has to be on the weather, right? It's extremely volatile, the forecast that is, if we're taking a look at it out there for Thursday. But the HRRR forecast, which historically is the best one that we've got, right? This is the one that's the most accurate within 24 hours, is calling for pretty calm conditions, right? Especially towards the middle end of the day. Now, local forecasts, right, are calling for thunderstorms, the potential for delays. So that could kind of throw everything off. But based on what I'm seeing, I think the guys that play tomorrow, whether it's, they're actually going off early or whether they start towards the middle to even afternoon out there, the AM wave guys, right, whenever they tee off tomorrow, right, I think are going to get after this golf course. Reason for that, course is getting over an inch of rain overnight. And if they're going to be playing in winds that are even this 12, 13 miles an hour, right, that we get towards the end of this forecast, they're going to shoot 2.5, 3 under par here, right? If we take a look at the scoring average from last year and for some of the years before, so last year it played 2.34 under par. First day, 1.8 under. Day 2, 1.22 under. Days 1 and 2, there was a lot of nasty wind out there. Day 3, 2.4 under. And then the X factor for 2023 was it got a little bit less windy on Saturday, right? So scores got a little bit better. But before round 4, there was a big rainstorm. They had a lot of rain come through. Course softened up, right? Winds weren't all that bad out there for Sunday. And what did they do? They shot the grass off the place, right? It scored to a 3.95 under par scoring average, which is 67.05 strokes. Now, it's not going to be quite like that tomorrow, right? There's going to be a little bit of wind, but they're going to get all of that rain, right? It's likely to be ball in hand, like I was mentioning before. If that happens, guys, I could see the scoring average being at least 2.5 under, if not close to the 3 strokes under par. And that's before the cut, right? You have a lot of the scrubs that are likely going to end up missing the cut. Guys out of form, right? They're going to end up missing the cut still out there. And you might see that 68 scoring average out there for round 1. So when we take a look at this underdog and prize picks board, and you see they have guys at like 68 strokes or 68.5 strokes like Rye, a lot of guys in that same kind of range, that's essentially them being projected at the potential scoring average. Now, the storms could throw things off. I'm being a little bit more conservative about my projections and putting the scoring average at like 2 to maybe 2.5 under par out there for the field. But ball in hand is going to help. And these wins, right, on the most reliable of all the forecasts are not, calling for much, right? It's calling to be extremely timid out there for Thursday's action. So I think that there's a lot of unders on strokes that we can take and a lot of overs on birdies. So to give you an idea of my favorite props, somebody mentioned the Siwoo Kim prop before at 68 strokes, right? He's the #1 player in recent form. You've got to love that for an under at 68. So he's got the PMT time. So that's maybe the one thing that I don't love about it, but a prop that I would definitely still mix in. Now, another one I want to point out here would be an over on Mark Hubbard birdies. Mark Hubbard is the number 16 player on tour when it comes to birdie or better percentage. And he's essentially the number 2 player in the field when it comes to making birdies, projected at what might be the field average. Now, I didn't show this before, so let me go ahead and actually bring this up for you guys. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to post the averages for this week. So I have actually, let me open another tab so that we can get it up here. Like I do for all my Patreons every single week, right after every single round, I post the averages, right, for any given golf tournament. So let me bring those up and show you. I've got the projections for birdies about 4.5 per round, right? So to circle back to the Mark Hubbard prop, he's at 4.5 birdies, right? He's the number 16 player on the PGA Tour when it comes to making birdies, right? If he's at what I think the field average is going to be, that's an absolute steal. But I guess we should have led off with this when it came to the prop stuff. Here are the averages out here for this golf course. So it was a par 71 last year, par 72 back there in 2022, 2021. So just keep that in mind, right? When you look at the averages, right? Obviously, them changing the par of a hole is going to have a pretty big impact on the golf course. But last year still played about 2 under par. Birdie average was about 4.3. Bogey average about 2.2 per round. Year before that, played easier, right? Partially because it was a par 72. But 4.86 birdies and only 2.16 bogeys per round. So birdies went up, right? Bogeys went down with the fact they changed the par. And then year before that, similar story, right? More birdies, slightly less bogeys being made out there in 2021. But what you'll notice, and I guess the most important part here, right, is that it didn't change all that much, right? I mean, the birdie average was only 0.2 different between last year and 2021. And in 2021, I think like 28 under par 1. That's when Cage Lee boat raced the field. Let's just double check that, right? 25 under par ended up winning that year. They got to 25 under par, right? It was only a 0.2 birdie difference, right, between last year and then 2021. Now we take a look at the weather, right? They're getting all that rain overnight. I mean, maybe it is like the averages that we had from 2022 or 2021. So these 2021 averages, right, where it's like 2.4 under par, right, 4.5 birdies, this 2.14 bogeys is, I think, the kind of conditions that we're going to get this year, right? I think it'll be easier than last year because of the fact that we're getting so much rain, also have relatively low winds, right? That'll help the players this time around. Ball in hand, right? Another little boost to the scoring out there. So if we're going to look at anything, I think these 2021 numbers, ironically enough, are probably the best ones to look at. So in terms of a winning score, I would have to put the guess around 25 under. That's what I said on Monday on my course breakdown video. So I'll stand behind that. I'll keep my projection at 25 under. And that's the exact score that won in 2021. So we already have those 2 props over there on Prize Picks. In terms of underdog exposure, a few different spots that we can take here. So I'm going to throw in this under on Siwoo Kim par 5 strokes. Actually, we already took a Siwoo Kim prop, so I'll avoid that. But that is a spot that I like. I guess I spilled the beans on that one, huh? But did they take his fairways off? So yeah, it looks like they took the Adam Scott fairways off, which I had his under 10 fairways, which again, this is just a reason to go out there, right? And join the Patreon so you can catch all of these props. But yeah, they took that off there. So can't give you guys that for the live stream. But let's find a few others that we can mix in. So I had an they bumped that one too. Wow, they're big with the bumps today. So I had an under on Jordan Spieth fantasy score. They bumped that one as well. So I didn't realize they were going bump crazy today. You go with this Tom Hoagie one. That one didn't move. Let's see. Did they move the Alex Noren? They did. They bumped Alex Noren, unfortunately. God damn, they went crazy with this shit, huh? Did they bump? So they didn't bump that because it's still 0.9x. So I guess that could be a prop. Don't think I took J-Day. Did I take a Sunjay prop? I don't think I took a Sunjay prop. Damn. Yeah, they did bump quite a bit of this. So yeah, again, I guess just a shout out to the Patreon page, right? If you're going to catch these, that's the spot to do it. So I'm just going to throw a bunch of the props I took in the cart here so that we can figure out what to do for a card. But yeah, actually, let me stop sharing my screen. Let me take a look at my cards just to remind myself. Yeah, they bumped that Spieth one. Let's look at the Hostler and List props that I took. So 1 second. I had a few unders on fairways. So I mentioned it was Adam Scott under 10 fairways. I did take Luke List under 9.5 fairways and also Beau Hostler under 9.5 fairways, but they may have taken them off. So let me double check on that. So Luke List, yeah, they don't have his fairway prop anymore. So that's interesting. And then Beau Hostler, they also bumped down to 9. So yeah, they went bump crazy, guys. They bumped pretty much every single prop that I took outside of these three. So these will be the three stragglers as of right now. Now, the issue is that 2 of them have multipliers. So you only get a 3x payout, right, for this 3x card, which is just absolutely ridiculous. So I'd probably avoid the 0.85x, right? If you were going to go with anything, it'd be these 2. But even that is only a 2.43x. So what we're going to do here is rather than leave you guys hanging, we're going to make another slip. So we're going to go through the board, try and find a little bit of the hanging value here and get something done. But before we do that, I'll just give you guys another slip that I entered over here in Prize Picks, and then we'll circle back around and try and figure out something here for Underdog. So in terms of Prize Picks, right, I have a bunch more stuff that I've already mixed in. So a few other spots you can consider, right, over on Cage Lead birdies. I think that's a really good spot. And then Tom Kim understrokes is another spot that I'd shout out as well. So first off, KH right, he's projected at the field average right there at like 4.5 birdies. Again, just to circle back, that's kind of what I'm expecting for the field average tomorrow. And given that he's won this event twice, last year he went over in 3 of his 4 rounds. That was despite not really having the best year at this golf tournament, right? I think that makes quite a bit of sense. And then Tom Kim at 68 strokes, kind of like Siwoo Kim, he actually has an AMT time. So I think that gives him a little bit of a boost there too. He's another guy that I'm expecting to tear up this course, right? Decent form coming in, decent momentum when it comes to his performance. Has been a lot better over the last event and a half than what we've seen really all here at 2024. And he's a really good course fit guy, right? A lot of people betting him outright this week. A lot of people trying to jump on the train early. Of course, Thomas the Tank Engine Kim out there with his nickname. But yeah, I like him there at 68 strokes as well, right? -3 would be a push. -4 is what we're looking for to go out there and hit. And considering I think the scoring average might be 2.5, 3 under par, right? That's asking Tom Kim to essentially have a field average day, right? To go out there and push, if not just gain a stroke to the field to go out there and cover. So when you look at it that way, that's where I see a lot of the value out here on the stroke side, which again, like a 3 under par scoring average, right? A 3 under par projection, right? Looks pretty low, but at a birdie fest like this, a course that has a weak field, an event that has a weak field like what we have here, somebody like Tom Kim, Jordan Spieth, Siwoo Kim can really separate from the field, right? They're going to average like a stroke and a half, 2 strokes to the field gained, and 2 strokes to the field gained with a 68.5 scoring average, right, would be 66.5 strokes, right? Even a stroke and a half to the field, right, would be 67 strokes out there. So when you look at it that way, that's why I see all that kind of value on some of these unders on strokes. So that's another slip over there in Prize Picks. But like I mentioned, I want to find something over here in Underdog because those 3 props aren't going to work. Now, what we can do to try and find a slip is we can throw in that Tom Hoagie prop, which has, I believe, I think this got bumped a little bit. So I think they had him at like 31.75 before or something like that. But we could still make this work. So I'm going to throw him in there. And then we're going to try and either find something that gives us like 2.8x for a payout or potentially even a fade to get slightly over 3x here. So I guess the reasoning here for Tom Hoge, just to go over that first, is this line here with 32.5 fantasy points is essentially a 68.5 strokes line. And whether it's on Prize Picks, whether it's on this site itself, right? He's at 68 strokes on Underdog. On Prize Picks, they also have him at 68 strokes. If I bring up Fanduel 1 second, which Fanduel is such a pain in the ass. If you bring it up in Florida, it gives you some error message unless you load the site twice. But apparently loading the site twice just completely bypasses that, which is beautiful. Just ridiculous that they make us go through that. But his projection over here on this site, right, is minus 150, right, at 68.5. So you're getting the minus 150 juice, the 0.5 discrepancy out there. And the issue with these fantasy score props is for some reason, you get a slightly lower payout over here on Underdog. But if we can find a fade to take like this, it won't be all that bad. So, and by a fade, right, I mean a stance against a player. So it's either going to be an over on strokes and unders on birdies or an over on bogeys that we could take for that. If we can find something, we can make this payout work. But the issue is I think conditions are going to be so easy that it's difficult to go out there and find a fade. So we might have to just go out there and try and take like a double over on fantasy scores and just accept the lower payout. But ideally, right, if we can find a fade to take, right, we can get over a 3x payout. Now, Luke List wouldn't be my favorite player to take there, but let's see what we can cook up. So yeah, they had Hostler at 9.5 fairways. They bumped that, unfortunately. Let's see. If I refresh this, did they repost Adam Scott fairways or did they repost, who was the other one? So let's see. Adam Scott, they haven't reposted. Who was the other one? Yeah, Luke List, right? They haven't reposted that one either. That's unfortunate. So Adam Schenk is another potential fade for fairways. So the idea with these fades, right, is the average no matter what. So if we go to the last 3 years, right, something that's not really going to change year to year. If you change the par of a golf course, it's going to change your birdie average. It's going to change your bogey average for sure, right? But what's not really going to change is your fairway average, right? By changing the par of the golf course. And you see that with the stats, right? It's almost always about 8.48. For some reason in 2021, it was way higher. And frankly, I couldn't give you the answer why we had the higher average there in 2021. But the last 2 years, it's routinely been right about 8.5 fairways per round. And somebody like an Adam Schenk, like I preferred the Hostler under, the Luke List under, who both rank outside the top 100 on tour in driving accuracy. But like even an Adam Schenk, who's like a tour average guy with accuracy, right? You'd project him at about the field average, which you can see with my projections down here at the bottom, I've got it about like 8.5 per round. Right? So even with the softer conditions, it's still somebody I'd be looking at for the under. And because we do that, right, we get slightly over this 3x payout. So for the sake of the live stream, it's not my favorite fade out there with Adam Schenk, but it's good enough to go out there and get a slip in. And this over on Tom Hoge is a prop that I'd go out there and mix in. So that's what I'll say for that. And yeah, again, apologies for all the bumps, but that's what happens when you run a Patreon, right? You get a lot of people tailing your stuff, a lot of action coming in, and I get leaked a lot too. A lot of different Discords, a lot of different cappers out there, including 3 big Twitter cappers that I know of, just directly, take my stuff and post it as their own, which I've called out a few of them already. We're not going to do it out here again, but that's why shit gets bumped, right? Because you got my people playing it, all these other Discords that are just going out there and playing my shit. So that's why you get some crazy bumps out there. But if you want to catch them before, the only place to do it is the Patreon. So check it out, guys. I really like Brian, but you don't know how much of what a good write-up for him would be. So Brian who? I'm not sure who you're talking about, man. But yeah, if you let me know which Brian you're talking about, I can give you some help. Because just off the top of my head, I don't really know Brian in the field. Back 9 bets says Minwoo under 9.5 fairways. Yes. So something that surprised me, man. And I wanted to play that exact prop. So I looked this up today. And there's only one reason I stayed away from it. And it's this data point. And just take this with a grain of salt because I 100% agree with you. There's a reason why I researched this. Minwoo is not an accurate driver, right? If you take a look at the European Tour stuff, right, where he has a larger sample size, he's a below average accuracy guy, and that's on a slightly inferior tour, right? So he doesn't hit many fairways to begin with. But when you look at the 2024 stuff, and this might be the golf courses that he's played, right? Because he hasn't played as many events as a lot of other players. Like he's only had 306 fairways to hit, right? Most other guys are in the 400, 500 range. But as you can see there, right, not to get too far ahead of myself, right, he was number 20 on tour, when it comes to driving accuracy, right? He's hitting nearly 71% of his fairways. I was hoping or expecting to see him, right, like much lower when it comes to those rankings. But for whatever reason, he's been hitting an absolute shit ton of fairways this year. Now, what I want to look here are the courses that he's played, right? Because there's got to be something to this. So Valspar actually had small fairways, but Masters, some of the widest fairways on tour. Players, pretty narrow. Arnold Palmer, pretty narrow fairways. Cognizant, I'd even say pretty narrow fairways. But yeah, pretty easy to hit at the Amex, right? Yeah, pretty easy to hit out there at the Phoenix Open. Definitely the Masters, but there's also a handful of events where it's like average at best in terms of your driving accuracy. It's crazy to me. So did he find something, right? Is he maybe not swinging as hard at the golf ball over here on the PGA Tour side? This is the only thing that kept me from going out there and playing that. So in general, I think it's a solid prop. Like I would definitely lean under. There's zero chance I would consider taking an over. That'd probably be one of the worst plays that you could take on the board, right? An over at 9.5. But yeah, under, man, 100% a lean I was looking at. But that data point is just, it's crazy. I don't understand how he's hitting all these fairways. That's just, he's not that sort of player. And I guess just to show you, I'll bring up the European Tour stuff. Like he's like long term, he does not hit fairways like at all. So it has to be the golf courses, or maybe he changed his swing a little bit. But to show you what I'm talking about, I'm over on the European Tour site right now, so trying to bring that up. Because there's a lot of data to say that he doesn't hit fairways. That's for damn sure. So if we go back to 2023, and we sort this by driving accuracy, then we look up our boy Minwoo here, who I love out there in tour, but he definitely doesn't hit fairways. We had to scroll the whole way down to number 157 on tour, where he hit just 51.5% of fairways out there in 2023. And he's one of the best players on that tour, right, out there that year. And he was hitting about 6% less fairways on average, right? So he was well below average when it came to the accuracy. And then now we're at a week, right, where the average is going to be like 8.5. Like, yeah, he would project well under 9.5. So this is the sample size that I think is a lot better. Like he was right there with Rory, right, when it came to driving accuracy. Like that makes sense, right? As two players that are bombers. The stats from this year are just kind of crazy, kind of just don't make sense when you take a look at them that way. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to point that out because I didn't understand what I was seeing when I was looking up the stats before. And I was hoping maybe someone else had an idea. He spiked really hard at the Players and Masters. Yeah, I could see it at the Masters, but Players, that's pretty impressive. Now you regret pulling the trigger. Yeah, dude, that was the only thing that held me back. But dude, I wouldn't feel that bad about it. Like, he definitely projects well under that. It's just like, what is to explain with the stats? Like, is it just the Masters stuff? Is it just the Amex, for example, that has those massive fairways? Or is it something else? So, yeah, I still think you're good there, though, man. But it got me. I was like, what the fuck is this? I had no explanation for it, and I tried. So it was Wesley Bryan. So yeah, you spelled Brian wrong. It's with a Y. So that's why you got me there. So, yeah, so for birdies, yeah, I think you could take those two. I was mentioning I thought those two props were pretty decent. The birdie average is like 4.5, right? So for him to go over that 4 number, you're going to need him to have a pretty decent day, but you are getting push equity out there at 4. So I kind of prefer the guys at 4.5 that are better birdie makers. So like a Mark Hubbard, for example, that I think just has a much better chance of getting to 5. But of course, he doesn't have the safety net, right, at getting to 4 birdies. So you know, it depends if you want to be safe about it, right, or kind of go for it a little bit more. If you want to be safe about it, then take the Wesley Bryan over 4, right? If you want to be a little bit more bold, kind of go for the hit or the miss. I think Mark Hubbard has probably a higher over rate, but at the same time, a little bit more of a bust rate there. I guess what I want to point out here, the last thing we'll go through is Hard Rock bets. So I did end up getting to some bets. You may have seen that if you're a part of the Patreon page. But if you haven't, right, they ended up posting a board like right after my preview went live. So I'll give you guys the exposure that I got to. And I think only 2 of the numbers drifted. So you should be able to get most of these if you're looking to tail. So I took Jordan Spieth at 16-1. He's at 15-1 now. So, you know, it moved a little bit, but it didn't go horribly. I took Tom Kim at 30-1. He's available at that same number, so you can get that. I took Cage Lee at 50-1. You could take that. I did not bet Mav at 50, but you can, right? That's, I think, a pretty decent number if you're going to tail him. And then I did end up betting Daniel Berger at 100-1, and I also took Sam Ryder at 150-1. Now, normally I'd only bet like $25 on a Sam Ryder or somebody like a Daniel Berger, but I bet 50 on Sam Ryder and 100 on somebody like Daniel Berger. So to say that I'll be rooting for those two would be an understatement out there this week. And it's because it's a birdie fest, right? Like, you're going to get some wild winners at these events. And to me, somebody like Sam Ryder is going to win an event in the next year or two. I'm very adamant about that. He has the kind of skill set with the pop on approach and the pop with the putter that if he can time it up where he has a spike week in both categories at the same time, like, that's a win right there, right? Like, Sam Ryder, you'll see him gain 5-6 strokes on approach, like a handful of times a year, like 5-6 times. With the putter, he'll gain 5-6 strokes like 10-15 times a year, right? He is one of those really good putters, one of those really solid spike putters that we have on tour. If you get a week where he marries that up, like you saw him leading, it was the Pebble Beach Pro-Am as a signature events a few years ago. Like, this is the type of golf tournament that, especially with a weaker field, an event that's a birdie fest that emphasizes the approach play and the putting, that he can win. So I don't know. I'm kind of calling my shot on Sam Ryder, but yeah, if there's a long shot that I've taken at 150 to 1 that I feel the best about, it's probably him. And then Daniel Berger, it's just about the putter, right? He's been really, really good with the tee to green play, just cannot get a putt to drop for his life. So those are the two main bets that I would be taking for long shots. But yeah, we went over the guys at 50 to 1. We went over Jordan, right? Tom Kim at the top. I haven't done much other than that. Now, I took a few top 10s. So I took a top 10 bet. It was on Mav McNeely, and then Daniel Berger I also took for a top 10 bet. So they had, let me see, with Daniel Berger. So Daniel Berger's down here at 10 to 1 now. So you can actually get a better number than what I got. Actually, let me double check on that. Was it 10 or 11 to 1 that I got? So yeah, I got plus 800. So plus 800. So you can actually get a better number out there on Daniel Berger now. So I'd probably recommend that if you can. And then, yeah, I took Mav McNeely at plus 550. Let's see, do they still have him at that number? Yeah, he's actually plus 525. So it's drifted just a little bit, but that's a look at the betting card for this week. See, any last second stuff? If not, we're hopping on out of here. Swinging, big buddy, you love it? Absolutely. Yeah, like I said, dude, it's a week where I think you might get a weird winner. And I don't know, I have my guys this week, right? Sam Ryder, Daniel Berger are the ones I'm going for. And I've got some chalk up top that I'm playing, but I would much rather it be Sam Ryder or Daniel Berger that win, because the payouts would be exponentially higher. Now, I've got, I think it's 230 that I have on Jordan Spieth. So it's a pretty big bet that I've got on my guy up top, but those two would definitely be a little bit sweeter. That's all I've got for this week, though, guys. Appreciate all the support here on the channel as per usual. Best luck with whatever exposure you guys are getting to, whether it's props, DFS lineups. Go out there and crush it this week. And let's reconvene for rounds 2 through 4. We'll be doing live streams, going over showdown props over there and all of your live questions, and just hanging out over the weekend, talking some golf. So looking forward to that. Best of luck out there. Like I was saying just before, if you haven't already hit the like button, go ahead, smash that for me on your way out of here, and go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss when I go live for those live streams. We've got this week, Wells Fargo next. So it's a signature event. That'll be pretty sweet. Also the Myrtle Beach golf tournament. So there'll be an alternate field as well. And then after that, we've got the PGA Championship. So major championship a few weeks away. We've got Jordan Spieth, right? He's going for the Triple Crown. I guess not Triple Crown. It's the Grand Slam we call it out here in golf, I guess. Out there, the PGA Championship. Looking forward to all that's to come. So appreciate you guys. Like I said, best of luck out there. And I'll catch you guys for that round 2 live stream.